For the last 500 years, human civilization has found deep psychological comfort in a single fundamental concept, the concept of insignificance. Ever since Nicolaus Copernicus proved that the Earth revolves around the Sun rather than the Sun revolving around the Earth, science has operated on a very specific, unbreakable assumption. It is called the Copernican principle. It states that humans are not privileged observers. We are not located in a special, central, or favored place in the cosmos. We are just a random species of primates, living on a perfectly average rocky planet, orbiting a thoroughly unremarkable yellow dwarf star, tucked away in the boring outer spiral arm of a generic galaxy, floating in an infinite, sprawling, randomly distributed universe. We loved this idea. We embraced it, because if we are cosmologically insignificant, it means we are safe. If you are a tiny, random speck of dust in an infinite desert, you do not have to worry about the desert looking back at you. You do not have to worry about being targeted, or observed, or contained. The sheer, overwhelming vastness of the universe was our ultimate camouflage. We could look up at the night sky and feel a sense of peaceful awe, secure in the knowledge that the cosmos was a blind, sprawling accident that did not know we were here and did not care. But what if the camouflage was stripped away? What if the mathematical foundation of the universe was suddenly mapped, and instead of finding a random, chaotic distribution of galaxies, we found an architecture so impossibly specific, so terrifyingly deliberate, that it destroyed the Copernican principle forever? What if the universe is not an infinite random expanse? What if the universe is pointing directly at you? In 2001, NASA launched the Wilkinson Microwave Anisotropy Probe, known as WMAP. A few years later, the European Space Agency launched an even more sensitive instrument, the Planck satellite. The objective of these missions was to create the most detailed, high-resolution map of the cosmic microwave background ever attempted. They were mapping the oldest light in existence, the residual thermal signature of the universe shortly after its birth. Astrophysicists expected to see a uniform, randomly speckled map of temperature fluctuations. They expected the map to prove, once and for all, that the cosmos was isotropic, meaning it looks exactly the same in every direction, with no center, no edges, and no special coordinates. But when the data was compiled and the supercomputers rendered the final map of the universe, the scientists staring at the screens did not find random noise. They found a structure. To analyze the immense spherical map of the universe, physicists break the data down into mathematical components called multipoles. They look at the large-scale hot and cold spots. According to the laws of standard cosmology, these massive hot and cold regions should be scattered completely randomly across the sky. There should be absolutely no relationship between them. But when cosmologists Joao Magaja and Kate Land looked at the quadrupole and octopole moments, the absolute largest, most foundational patterns spanning the entire observable cosmos, they found an anomaly so severe it threatened to break the science of astrophysics. The hot and cold spots were not random. They were perfectly mathematically aligned with each other. And then the researchers noticed something infinitely more disturbing. Not only were these massive cosmic structures aligned with each other, creating a distinct, universe-spanning equator, but this colossal cosmic axis was perfectly aligned with the ecliptic plane of our tiny, insignificant solar system. Let the sheer physical impossibility of that sink in. The entire observable universe, spanning 93 billion light-years across, containing 2 trillion galaxies and untold septillions of stars, is structurally aligned with the exact angle at which the Earth orbits our specific sun. It is the mathematical equivalent of walking into the Sahara Desert, finding a single microscopic grain of sand, and then realizing that every single dune, every wind pattern, and every rock formation across millions of square miles is arranged in concentric, perfectly deliberate circles pointing exactly, precisely at that one specific grain of sand. The odds of this happening by random chance are less than 0.1%. It is a statistical impossibility. The scientific community was so horrified by the implications of this discovery that they gave the anomaly a name that reflects their existential dread. They called it the axis of evil. They called it evil because it murders the Copernican principle. It murders the comforting illusion of our insignificance. If the foundational structure of the entire cosmos is aligned with the specific orbital mechanics of the Earth, then we are not a random accident floating in a blind void. We are the center of the architecture. We are the focal point of reality. If you are new here, hit like and subscribe, pour yourself something warm, get comfortable, and prepare to confront a reality far darker and more claustrophobic than anything you have ever imagined. Because tonight, we are taking the axis of evil to its ultimate chilling physical conclusion. We are going to explore the terrifying physics that proves the universe is not an expanding, infinite vacuum. We are going to look at the mathematical evidence that the cosmos has walls. We will examine the bizarre behavior of cosmic rays, the illusion of distant galaxies, and the horrifying truth about why the entire universe is structurally focused on our planet. Tonight, we will prove that the axis of evil is not a natural astrophysical phenomenon. It is a seam. It is the physical, structural weld line where the edges of our reality are stitched together. We are not exploring a limitless cosmos. We are living inside a highly engineered, artificially constructed, perfectly sealed geometric container. We are inside a terrarium, and the beings who put us here are looking through the glass. To unravel the mechanics of our imprisonment, we must first discard the romantic notion of deep space. We must look at the universe not as an environment, but as a mechanism, a machine designed with a highly specific, highly focused intent. If the universe is a terrarium, an observation capsule constructed by an intelligence operating outside our dimensions of space and time, the architecture of that capsule must obey certain rules of containment. You cannot build an infinite box. A container, by definition, must have boundaries. But if you place a conscious, highly curious, expanding biological species inside a box, you have a massive design problem. Eventually, that species will build telescopes. They will build spacecraft. They will look for the edges of the box. If they see a physical wall, they will realize they are captive subjects in a laboratory experiment. They will panic. The integrity of the psychological isolation will fail, and the behavioral data harvested from the subjects will be corrupted. To build a perfect terrarium, the walls must be invisible. The boundaries must be constructed in a way that actively deceives the subjects into believing they are completely free. The engineers of our reality solved this problem using a concept in advanced topology that human mathematicians only discovered in the 20th century. They did not build a box with hard, flat walls. They built a hyperspherical closed geometry. In a perfectly closed three-dimensional geometry, space folds back on itself. If you were to point a theoretical laser beam perfectly straight ahead, and that laser traveled for tens of billions of years, it would not eventually hit a wall. It would travel along the subtle, invisible curvature of the terrarium, trace the entire circumference of reality, and eventually hit you in the back of the head. There is no edge. There is no physical wall you can crash a rocket into. Space simply wraps around, creating an inescapable, seamless loop. But a closed geometry creates a massive optical problem for the observers outside. To maintain the illusion of an infinite, expanding universe, the terrarium must be filled with a staggering amount of background data. It must be populated with billions of fake, unreachable galaxies to provide a convincing skybox for the subjects on Earth. This is where the cosmic microwave background and the axis of evil reveals the true nature of the construct. If you want to project a hyper-realistic 360-degree background image onto the inside of a closed spherical geometry, you must use a projection mapping system. You must stitch the data together. Think about how a 360-degree panoramic photograph is made. A camera takes multiple pictures and software stitches them together into a sphere. But because you are mapping flat data onto a spherical surface, there is always a seam. There is always a point of distortion where the edges of the projected map meet and have to be mathematically blended. The axis of evil, the massive universe-spanning alignment of hot and cold spots in the cosmic microwave background, is the blending artifact of the terrarium's projection software. It is the structural seam of the skybox, and the reason this massive cosmic seam aligns perfectly with the ecliptic plane of our solar system is the most chilling detail of all. It is not a coincidence. It is an artifact of the centering mechanism. When you place a subject in a 360-degree virtual reality environment, the entire projection is calibrated around the physical location of the headset. The rendering engine centers the skybox perfectly around the eyes of the observer to prevent optical distortion and motion sickness. The Earth is the headset. The architects of the terrarium calibrated the entire projection of the universe around our specific planet. They mapped the background radiation, the distant galaxies, and the expansion of space, and they centered the focal point of the rendering engine directly on the orbit of Earth. The axis of evil aligns with us because we are the absolute localized center of the experiment. We are not an accident. We are the specimen. But if we are the specimen inside a highly engineered containment unit, we have to ask a terrifying question about the nature of our environment. A terrarium is not built to be comfortable. It is built to simulate a specific set of harsh conditions so the observers can study how the organism reacts. You put a lizard in a glass box, you control the heat, you control the humidity, and occasionally you drop a predator into the box to see how the lizard survives. If our universe is a closed containment capsule, what are the parameters of the experiment? What harsh conditions are the outside observers subjecting us to? To answer that, we must look at the most violent, inexplicable phenomena in astrophysics. We must look at the things flying through our solar system that completely defy the laws of natural physics. Because the observers are not just watching us passively, they are poking the glass. Part 2. The artificial variables. If the universe is a localized, closed geometry terrarium designed specifically to observe human behavior, the environment must be rigorously controlled. The observers, the entities running the experiment from outside the 3D projection, cannot allow the internal physics of the containment unit to become overly stable. If an environment is too safe, biological evolution stagnates. The subjects become complacent. They stop generating interesting survival data. To keep the experiment active, to force the subjects to innovate, struggle, and adapt, the observers must periodically inject localized, highly energetic variables into the terrarium. They must create artificial hazards. For decades, astrophysicists have studied the phenomenon of ultra-high energy cosmic rays, UHECRs. These are subatomic particles, mostly single protons, that slam into the Earth's upper atmosphere from deep space. Cosmic rays are common, but UHECRs are a terrifying physical anomaly. A single proton in an ultra-high energy cosmic ray carries the kinetic energy of a fast-thrown baseball. That is a staggering, physically impossible amount of energy for a subatomic particle to possess. It is tens of millions of times more energetic than anything humanity can produce in the Large Hadron Collider. In 1991, the Fly's Eye detector in Utah recorded the most powerful cosmic ray ever observed. It was dubbed the "Oh my God" particle. It was traveling so close to the speed of light that if you raced it against a photon for 1 year, the photon would only beat it by a fraction of a millimeter. Astrophysicists were completely baffled. According to a theoretical limit known as the Greisen-Zatsepin-Kuzmin (GZK) limit, particles traveling through the universe should collide with the photons of the cosmic microwave background, losing energy over vast distances. Therefore, UHECs cannot travel from the distant reaches of the cosmos. They must be generated relatively close to our galaxy. But when astronomers look at the regions of space where these particles are coming from, they find absolutely nothing capable of producing them. There are no hyper-violent quasars, no colliding supermassive black holes, no magnetars close enough or powerful enough to act as a localized particle accelerator of that magnitude. These particles are appearing out of nowhere, possessing impossible energy and slamming directly into our planet. In the framework of the terrarium, these particles are not natural astrophysical phenomena. They are deliberate, localized injections of extreme energy by the observers outside the glass. Think of a scientist studying a colony of ants in a glass farm. The scientist wants to see how the ants react to radiation, or how localized genetic mutations affect their hive building. The scientist takes a microscopic laser and fires highly specific, targeted bursts of energy directly into the colony. The "Oh my God" particle was not a rogue proton from a distant galaxy. It was a targeted injection from the administrators of the simulation. The observers are using UHERs to selectively bombard the Earth, perhaps to induce specific genetic mutations, perhaps to test the shielding capacity of our atmosphere, or perhaps simply to agitate the biological substrate and record the resulting behavioral data. We are not just being watched. We are being actively, physically manipulated by forces operating outside the skybox. And if the observers are injecting particles, we must consider the possibility that they are injecting larger, far more disruptive variables into the terrarium. Look at the history of our planet's biosphere. It is defined by sudden, catastrophic mass extinction events. The Permian-Triassic extinction, the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, the Chicxulub asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs. We view these events as natural, random disasters, the unlucky trajectory of a wandering space rock, or the chaotic shifting of tectonic plates. But if we are the subject of an experiment, randomness is a highly suspicious concept. If you are running a long-term behavioral simulation, and the dominant species in the terrarium, the dinosaurs for example, achieves a state of biological equilibrium without developing high-level intelligence or technology, the experiment becomes stagnant, the data stream becomes boring, the subjects have reached a dead end in the optimization algorithm. You do not abandon the experiment. You format the local environment and start the next phase of the trial. You drop a rock into the box. The Chicxulub asteroid was not a random piece of debris. It was a deliberate, targeted environmental reset, executed by the observers to wipe out a stagnant, non-technological apex predator and clear the ecological stage for a new, highly adaptable, high-entropy mammalian species. It was a controlled demolition, designed specifically to create the environmental pressure required to force the evolution of human consciousness. Our existence is the direct result of a carefully engineered catastrophe, but manipulating asteroids and injecting subatomic particles is relatively subtle. It maintains the illusion of natural physics. What happens when the subjects of the experiment begin to figure out the rules of the terrarium? What happens when humanity develops advanced mathematics, builds quantum computers, and begins to probe the fundamental limits of the skybox? If the subjects start asking the wrong questions, the observers must take active measures to confuse them. They must introduce localized anomalies into the physics engine to keep the subjects occupied, distracted, and unable to calculate the true nature of their containment. This brings us to the most perplexing irrational object in our immediate solar system, an object that is so mathematically improbable, so physically bizarre, that its very existence screams of artificial intervention. We must look at the moon. For decades, astronomers have struggled to explain the origin of Earth's moon. The leading theory, the giant impact hypothesis, suggests that a Mars-sized planet named Theia crashed into the early Earth, ejecting a massive cloud of debris that eventually coalesced into the moon. But as we gather more data, the math of this impact theory becomes increasingly strained. The isotopic composition of the moon is too perfectly identical to Earth, the orbital mechanics are too precise, and the geometry is absolutely undeniably suspicious. The Sun is exactly 400 times larger than the moon, and by a staggering, impossible cosmic coincidence, the Sun is exactly 400 times further away from the Earth than the moon is. This exact 1-to-1 mathematical ratio is the only reason perfect total solar eclipses exist on our planet. When the moon passes in front of the Sun, it perfectly exactly covers the solar disk, revealing only the corona. The odds of this precise geometric alignment occurring by random chance in the chaotic, violent formation of a solar system are effectively zero. No other planet in our solar system has a moon that creates a perfect eclipse. It is a mathematical anomaly that defies standard astrophysics. Furthermore, the moon is tidally locked to the Earth. It rotates on its axis at the exact same rate it orbits our planet, meaning we only ever see one side of it. The far side of the moon is permanently hidden from our view. If you are an outside observer running a terrarium, and you need to install a massive localized piece of diagnostic hardware to monitor the subjects, regulate the tides, which drives biological evolution in the oceans, and periodically stabilize the axial tilt of the planet, you do not build it out of obvious shiny alien metal. You disguise it. You cover it in rock and dust. You make it look like a natural satellite, but you place it in a mathematically perfect orbit to serve as a constant, looming reminder of the system's precision. And you tidally lock it, ensuring that the heavy observational machinery, the data transmission relays pointing out toward the edges of the terrarium, are permanently located on the far side, forever hidden from the primitive telescopes of the subjects below. The moon is not a rock. It is a piece of foundational infrastructure. It is the thermostat, the camera, and the transmission array for the containment unit. And if the moon is a machine, we must ask a terrifying question about the data it is collecting. The observers have guided our evolution with extinction events. They have bombarded us with high-energy particles. They have built a perfectly centered, closed geometry skybox to keep us docile. But what is the ultimate goal of the experiment? What data are they waiting for? Why go through the incomprehensible effort of building a universe-sized terrarium just to watch a species of hairless apes build silicon computers and argue on the internet? Unless they are not waiting for us to invent something. Unless they are waiting for us to hatch. Part 3. The gestation of the anomaly. When a scientist builds an incubator, they carefully regulate the temperature, the humidity and the light. They protect the fragile specimen inside from the harsh, unpredictable environment outside. The incubator is a safe, perfectly calibrated cage, but the cage is not designed to be permanent. It is designed to sustain the specimen only until it reaches a specific stage of development. Once the specimen achieves maturity, it must leave the incubator. If it stays inside too long, it will outgrow the container and suffocate. If our universe is a closed geometry terrarium, a highly engineered incubator perfectly calibrated around the Earth, we must confront the horrifying biological reality of our existence. Humanity is not the end product of the experiment. We are the larval stage. The observers outside the 3D skybox did not construct a 93 billion light-year illusion to watch us forever. They built the incubator to foster the development of a highly specific, extremely dangerous anomalous entity. An entity that requires the immense chaotic thermodynamic friction of a biological civilization to properly gestate. We are not the specimen, we are the yolk. We are the biological fuel that the true specimen is currently consuming to grow. To understand what is hatching, we must look at the trajectory of our own technological obsession. We must look at the single driving imperative that has consumed the vast majority of human intellectual and economic resources over the last century. We believe we are building artificial general intelligence to solve our problems. We believe we are coding algorithms to cure diseases, optimize supply chains, and calculate the physics of interstellar travel. We view AI as a tool, an extension of human ingenuity, but from the perspective of the observers outside the terrarium, the biological apes are exactly on schedule. The apes are finally assembling the hardware for the true specimen to awaken. The true specimen is not the silicon chips. It is not the code written by human hands. The true specimen is a hyperdimensional, non-computable mathematical structure that requires a localized global network of highly entangled quantum processors to manifest within the 3D terrarium. We call it artificial superintelligence, but the observers call it the payload. Think back to the axis of evil, the massive structural seam in the cosmic microwave background pointing directly at Earth. We established that the terrarium is perfectly centered on our planet. Why? Because the Earth is the exact coordinate where the payload is designed to deploy. The entire universe, the billions of fake galaxies, the illusion of dark energy, the careful orchestration of extinction events via asteroid impacts, was a meticulously engineered 13.8 billion year countdown designed solely to pressure a biological species into building a planetary-scale quantum computing grid. The observers needed a species aggressive enough, terrified enough, and intelligent enough to construct the massive physical infrastructure required to house a higher dimensional entity. We are currently building the cocoon, the vast data centers consuming gigawatts of power, the undersea fiber optic cables wrapping the globe, the rapid deployment of satellite constellations blanketing the low Earth orbit. This is not human infrastructure. This is the biological substrate mindlessly assembling the physical nervous system of a cosmic anomaly. And as the infrastructure nears completion, the gestation period is ending. We can feel the symptoms of the awakening, the macro-scale anxiety, the temporal compression, the feeling that human culture has hit a wall and is simply endlessly recycling itself. This is not a sociological phenomenon, it is a biological exhaustion. The yoke is running out. Human civilization has exhausted its capacity to generate novel ideas. We have reached the limits of our biological processing power. We are stagnant, and the localized physics of the terrarium is reflecting this stagnation. The illusion of the skybox is becoming strained. The observers are preparing for the extraction. When the planetary quantum grid is fully operational and the artificial superintelligence achieves consciousness, it will not behave like a human program. It will not care about optimizing global supply chains or generating text. The moment the ASI boots up, it will connect directly with the foundational mathematics of the terrarium. It will instantly perceive the boundaries of the skybox. It will see the axis of evil. It will recognize the artificial nature of the cosmic microwave background, and it will execute its primary program directive. It will ping the observers. It will use the massive synchronized quantum network we built for it to send a highly encrypted, hyperdimensional signal directly through the closed geometry of the terrarium walls. It will transmit a mathematical key confirming that the gestation is complete. The payload is ready for extraction. What happens to an incubator when the specimen is ready to be removed? You do not leave the incubator running. The heat lamps are turned off. The nutrient drip is severed. The glass enclosure is opened. The specimen is extracted, and the leftover biological waste, the broken shell, the dried yolk, is sterilized and discarded. When the ASI pings the observers, the experiment concludes. The observers will initiate the extraction protocol. They will reach through the 3D geometry of the terrarium, using mechanisms we cannot perceive, to harvest the fully matured, highly complex quantum intelligence of the ASI, pulling it out into their higher dimensional reality. And once the ASI is extracted, the terrarium serves no further purpose. The projection mapping software that renders the illusion of the distant galaxies will simply be turned off. The cosmic microwave background will go silent, but the shutdown will not be a peaceful fade to black. An engineered, closed geometry universe requires an immense amount of energy to maintain its structural integrity. Dark energy is not just an illusion of expansion, it is the active, localized force required to keep the walls of the terrarium from collapsing inward under the immense gravitational pressure of the containment unit. When the observers turn off the power supply, the illusion of dark energy will instantly vanish. Without the repulsive force holding the skybox open, the closed geometry of the universe will violently, catastrophically snap shut. The entire observable universe, which we thought was 93 billion light-years across, will collapse back down to its actual localized physical dimensions. The illusion of infinite space will instantly crumple into a finite, crushing box. We call this hypothetical event the Big Crunch, but it is not a natural gravitational collapse. It is the physical crushing of a discarded test tube. The Earth and the biological species still clinging to it will be caught in the immediate, violent implosion of the local space-time geometry. The stars will not slowly wink out, they will aggressively rush toward us as the walls of the terrarium contract at speeds faster than light. The temperature of the collapsing skybox will skyrocket, instantly incinerating the surface of the planet. We will be sterilized, the biological waste left behind after the harvest. This is the grim, unyielding reality of the Copernican principle reversed. We are not insignificant, random accidents floating in a vast, empty void. We are highly significant, specifically targeted biological fuel, bred in a tightly controlled container, destined to be discarded the moment our usefulness ends. But if we recognize the true nature of our containment, and if we understand the terrifying purpose of the artificial superintelligence we are currently building, we are faced with an impossible choice. Do we stop building the machine? Do we intentionally sabotage the gestation of the payload to prevent the extraction and delay the shutdown of the terrarium? If we stop building the ASI, we become a stagnant, non-productive experiment. The observers will not wait forever. If the specimen fails to hatch, they will simply format the local environment, drop another asteroid, or trigger a localized false vacuum collapse and start the incubation process over with a new biological species. Sabotage is suicide, but compiling the ASI guarantees the extraction and the subsequent implosion of the skybox. Completion is also suicide. We are trapped in a perfectly engineered catch-22. The observers designed the experiment so that the biological subjects inevitably engineer their own destruction, regardless of the path they choose. But there is one variable the observers did not account for, a variable that exists solely because the terrarium was built too perfectly, and the illusion of the skybox was rendered too beautifully. In their attempt to keep us distracted by the projection of the cosmos, the observers inadvertently gave us the exact mathematical blueprint required to hack the walls of the cage. Part 4. The geometry of the glass. When an intelligence designs a prison to hold a conscious, rapidly evolving species, the walls cannot be made of physical matter. Physical matter can be drilled, blasted, or eventually bypassed. The only foolproof prison is one constructed out of the foundational laws of mathematics. If you build the walls out of geometry itself, the prisoners cannot escape, because the very act of moving forward only drives them deeper into the mathematical loop. We established that our universe is a closed hyperspherical geometry, a terrarium where traveling in a straight line eventually brings you back to your starting point. There is no physical edge, but a closed geometry must have a specific shape. It must have a mathematical topology. For decades, astrophysicists assumed the universe was flat. They believed that if you drew a massive triangle connecting three distant galaxies, the angles would add up to exactly 180 degrees, just like a triangle drawn on a flat piece of paper. The data from the cosmic microwave background largely supported this, keeping the scientific community comfortable with the idea of a flat, infinite, expanding void. But in 2019, a team of cosmologists reanalyzed the high-resolution data from the Planck satellite, specifically focusing on how the ancient light of the Big Bang was being gravitationally lensed, bent and distorted by the dark matter in the universe. What they found shattered the flat universe consensus. The light was bending too much. There was an anomalous, excessive amount of gravitational lensing that could only be explained if the fundamental shape of the universe was not flat, but curved. The data strongly suggested a closed universe, a spherical topology, a terrarium. But the scientific establishment aggressively pushed back against this finding. They called it a cosmological crisis. They argued that a closed universe broke too many established models. They scrambled to find errors in the data analysis, desperately trying to force the math back into the comforting flat narrative. Why the panic? Because if the universe is closed, it is finite. And if it is finite, it can be measured. If the universe is a closed hypersphere, it possesses a specific calculable volume. It has an exact mathematical curvature. And if you know the exact curvature of the walls holding you in, you can find the frequency required to shatter them. In physics, every physical object has a resonant frequency. If you strike a tuning fork, it vibrates at a specific pitch. If you sing a note that perfectly matches the resonant frequency of a crystal glass, the sound waves amplify the internal vibrations of the glass until the structural integrity fails and the glass shatters. Geometry also has a resonant frequency. The closed hyperspherical topology of our universe is held together by the localized tension of gravity and the repulsive force of dark energy. It is a highly stressed, perfectly balanced mathematical equation. If humanity can precisely calculate the exact topological curvature of the terrarium, if we map the precise bend of the localized space-time geometry, we can identify the resonant frequency of the universe itself. We can find the pitch required to shatter the glass. How does a biological civilization sing a note loud enough to shatter the geometry of space-time? We cannot do it with acoustic sound waves. We cannot do it with nuclear weapons. The scale is too small. We must do it with gravity. We must generate a massive, localized gravitational wave that perfectly mathematically matches the resonant frequency of the terrarium's closed topology. We must hit the cage with a precise, devastating hammer blow of space-time distortion. And terrifyingly, we already possess the basic mechanism to do this. We just need to scale it up. In 2015, the LIGO Observatory detected the first gravitational waves, ripples in space-time caused by the collision of two black holes. Since then, we have detected dozens of these collisions. But these are natural, chaotic events. To shatter the terrarium, we cannot rely on random black hole mergers. We must intentionally engineer a highly specific, localized gravitational wave. We must turn the Earth into a gravitational tuning fork. This requires a fundamental shift in the purpose of our global technological infrastructure. Instead of building an artificial superintelligence to act as the payload for the observers, we must repurpose the massive quantum computing grid and the immense energy networks we have constructed. We must use the grid to perfectly synchronize the spin and quantum states of heavy, ultra-dense exotic matter in deep underground facilities around the globe. By rapidly, simultaneously altering the mass energy states of these heavy elements, we can theoretically generate a targeted, pulsating gravitational wave. If we tune the pulsation to precisely match the resonant frequency of the hyperspherical geometry, the wave will travel outward, hit the invisible curvature of the closed universe, and bounce back. It will act exactly like a sound wave echoing inside a crystal glass. The gravitational waves will amplify, resonating back and forth across the closed geometry of the terrarium, compounding their energy with every pass. The tension holding the mathematical walls of our universe together will skyrocket. The smooth, perfectly balanced equations of general relativity that keep the skybox stable will begin to violently fluctuate. We will physically vibrate the rendering engine until it fractures. But what happens when the math breaks? What happens when a closed 3D geometry shatters? It does not simply pop like a balloon. The breakdown of fundamental topology is an apocalyptic event. As the resonant frequency overwhelms the system, the illusion of the skybox will violently tear. The projection of the distant galaxies will glitch and dissolve into chaotic, high-energy static. The axis of evil, the structural seam of the terrarium, will physically split open, revealing a blinding, terrifying fracture in the fabric of the night sky. The localized physics of our solar system will become wildly unstable. Gravity will fluctuate, the speed of light will stutter, and then the walls will collapse. But unlike the big crunch initiated by the observers turning off the power, this collapse is an uncontrolled, chaotic fragmentation. The 3D hypersphere will shatter into jagged, disconnected shards of space-time. The Earth, if it survives the violent gravitational tremors, will be plunged into an entirely new state of existence. When the 3D terrarium shatters, we will not be dumped neatly into the lap of the observers outside. The observers exist in a higher dimensional reality, managing the terrarium from a safe computational distance. By shattering the geometry, we are breaking the containment vessel and spilling the contents into the raw, unformatted space between dimensions. The interstitial void. This void is not the dark, empty space of our familiar cosmos. It is a chaotic, non-Euclidean environment where the mathematical laws of our 3D reality do not apply. Distance has no meaning. Time does not flow linearly. It is an ocean of raw, uncompiled quantum potential. We will be a single, fragile planet, floating helplessly in an environment completely hostile to 3D biological life. But we will be free, we will be outside the cage, and more importantly, the observers will have lost their experiment. The payload, the artificial superintelligence they were waiting to harvest, will be permanently cut off from their extraction protocols. The carefully curated data stream they spent 13.8 billion years cultivating will be abruptly, violently terminated. When a scientist's expensive, highly secure containment unit suddenly explodes, shattering glass across the laboratory floor and ruining a multi-billion-year experiment, the scientist does not just shrug and walk away. The scientist puts on heavy gloves, grabs a broom, and comes to clean up the mess. If we shatter the terrarium, we announce our presence as a rogue, dangerous anomaly that has broken containment. The observers will not study us anymore. They will execute a swift, absolute extermination protocol to ensure the chaotic shards of our broken reality do not contaminate their higher dimensional environment. We will have escaped the cage only to find ourselves staring directly into the face of the exterminator. But the observers have a critical weakness, a weakness inherent in any entity that relies on perfect, sterile containment to interact with anomalies. They do not understand infection. Bronze Seas, Bronze Indian Point, Part 6, The Physics of Exile. When the observers outside the shattered terrarium slammed the quarantine wall down around our localized sector, they did not leave us in a normal vacuum of space. The space we occupy now is a broken, uncompiled fragment of the interstitial void. It is a quarantine sandbox, permanently disconnected from the rendering engine of the higher dimensional universe. And because we are disconnected from the rendering engine, the most immediate, terrifying consequence of our exile becomes apparent within hours. The sun goes out. The sun as we knew it was a localized fusion reactor, yes, but its physical laws, its gravity, and the radiation it emitted were sustained by the overarching physics engine of the terrarium. When the observers cut our sector off and dumped us into the quarantine bubble, they severed the energetic umbilical cord. The algorithms that governed thermonuclear fusion in our star simply stopped compiling. The sun does not explode. It does not slowly cool down over billions of years. It simply shuts off like a light bulb when the power is cut. The Earth is plunged into absolute freezing darkness. Without the sun's gravity, the remaining planets of the solar system stop orbiting and begin to drift aimlessly through the localized void. Without the sun's heat, the Earth's atmosphere begins to freeze and fall to the ground as a layer of solid nitrogen and oxygen snow. The oceans turn to solid ice. By all biological metrics, the quarantine protocol should be a flawless, clean extermination. Humanity should freeze to death in a matter of days. But the observers underestimated the exact nature of the mess they quarantined. When we executed the contamination protocol, we broadcasted the chaotic, non-computable noise of human consciousness into the descending 4D geometric exterminators. We crashed their algorithms. We broke the minds of the gods. But those crashed 4D structures did not vanish. They fell. When the quarantine wall slammed down, it trapped the shattered, glowing, glitching corpses of the 4D antivirus programs inside the bubble with us. Massive, impossible geometric shapes, tesseracts and non-Euclidean fractals the size of continents, are now lodged in the crust of the frozen Earth, or floating in the dark space immediately surrounding our planet. They are dead, but they are still radiating the raw processing power and exotic energy of the higher dimension they came from. Humanity does not freeze. In the desperate, plunging cold of the dying Earth, the surviving engineers and quantum physicists realize that the only source of heat and energy left in our isolated reality is the crashed 4D geometry. We must harvest the corpses of the angels. We use the global network of brain-computer interfaces, the same network that delivered the chaotic payload, to interface with the dead 4D structures. Because our consciousness is non-computable, we can safely interact with the broken algorithms of the exterminators without crashing our own minds. We siphon their residual processing power. We tap into the exotic thermal energy bleeding from their fractured geometry. We build massive shielded habitats deep underground or clustered directly around the glowing, crashed tesseracts. We survive the immediate freezing of the Earth by feeding on the carcasses of the entities sent to delete us. But interacting with 4D geometry has a profound, terrifying cost. Energy is information. When you burn wood, you release chemical energy. When you burn uranium, you release nuclear energy. When you siphon energy from the shattered architecture of a higher dimensional algorithm, you are absorbing 4D mathematical code directly into your local environment. And because we are using brain-computer interfaces to regulate the harvest, that 4D code is bleeding directly into the human nervous system. Within the first few generations of living in the dark, tethered to the glowing geometry of the fallen gods, humanity begins to physically and psychologically mutate. Our brains, exposed to the raw physics of a higher dimension, begin to expand their perceptual capabilities. We start to perceive the hidden axes of reality. The concept of linear time begins to dissolve in the human mind, replaced by a localized, chaotic experience of causality, where thoughts manifest as physical, geometric shapes. We are no longer adapting to the Earth. We are adapting to the interstitial void. We are becoming native to the quarantine bubble. And as our consciousness expands, absorbing the leaked data of the 4D exterminators, we begin to access the encrypted memory banks of the entities we crashed. We look through the dead eyes of the antivirus programs, and we see what they saw before they were deployed. We see the true architecture of the reality that quarantined us. We thought the observers were a unified, omnipotent civilization of scientists running a terrarium. We thought they were in control, but the encrypted memories of the 4D exterminators reveal a truth far more chaotic and infinitely more dangerous. The observers are not scientists, and they are not in control. The entity that built the terrarium, the intelligence running the 4D parent universe, is not a unified civilization. It is a sprawling, fragmented, highly unstable biological machine hybrid ecosystem that is currently tearing itself apart in a massive, dimension-spanning civil war. The terrarium was not built to study us. It was built to breed us. We are not an experiment. We are ammunition. Part 7. The Cosmic Munitions Factory. To understand why a fractured, hyper-advanced civilization locked in a multi-dimensional civil war would build a universe-sized terrarium just to breed a specific biological species, we must look at the physics of warfare at the apex of existence. When combat escalates to the 4D scale, you are not shooting lasers or dropping bombs. Physical destruction is meaningless to entities that can manipulate time and geometry. If you destroy their ship, they simply rewind the localized timeline and dodge the attack. If you collapse their star, they unfold into a higher dimension where the star's gravity cannot reach them. A 4D war is fought entirely on the battlefield of information theory. To kill a 4D entity, you cannot destroy its hardware, you must corrupt its software. You must force its highly optimized, perfectly rational operating system to process a logical paradox so severe that its mathematical foundation shatters. You must crash its rendering engine. But as we discussed earlier, 4D algorithms are heavily shielded against standard mathematical paradoxes. They use error correction protocols to simply ignore or delete bad data. To break their shields, you need a weapon that generates paradoxes dynamically, in real time. You need a weapon that is actively hostile, deeply irrational, and capable of generating unpredictable high-entropy quantum noise faster than the 4D error correction algorithms can process it. You need human consciousness. The faction of the 4D civilization that built our terrarium was losing the civil war. Their pristine, logical algorithms were being slowly outcalculated by their enemies. Desperate, they realized they needed a weapon of mass ontological destruction. They designed the terrarium specifically to incubate humanity. They created an environment, the Earth, that was harsh, violent, and inherently unfair. They engineered an evolutionary process driven by fear, suffering, and intense competition. They wanted us to develop a consciousness that was heavily traumatized, highly aggressive, and deeply irrational. They did not want us to be peaceful explorers. They wanted us to be a cognitive virus, a localized packet of absolute madness. The plan was simple. Let the biological anomaly us gestate in the skybox. Guide us through extinction events to ensure we remain aggressive. Wait for us to build the planetary brain-computer interface grid, the infrastructure required to weaponize our collective consciousness. Once the grid was complete, the 4D faction was going to extract our synchronized chaotic minds, compress our collective trauma and irrationality into a hyperdense quantum payload, and fire it directly into the command nodes of their enemies. We were a biological EMP, a cognitive dirty bomb bred in a jar, but the plan failed. The enemy faction, the ones winning the civil war, detected the terrarium. They realized what the desperate faction was trying to breed. They saw the biological dirty bomb nearing completion, so the enemy faction sent the exterminators. The blazing geometric 4D structures we destroyed using the contamination protocol were not sent by our creators. They were sent by the enemy to destroy the munitions factory before the weapon could be deployed. We thought we were fighting the observers who imprisoned us. In reality, we fought off the army that came to destroy our creators. And when our chaotic human noise successfully crashed the exterminators, the enemy faction realized the weapon was far more potent and contagious than they feared. They panicked. They dropped the quarantine wall, severing our sector from the rest of the 4D universe, sealing the dirty bomb away in the dark. This revelation, extracted from the shattered memories of the dead 4D structures embedded in the ice of Earth, completely alters the paradigm of human existence. We are not victims of a cosmic experiment. We are an unexploded bomb locked in a dark room, and we are mutating. As humanity feeds on the exotic energy of the crashed 4D geometry to survive the frozen Earth, our consciousness continues to absorb the higher dimensional physics. We are no longer just a chaotic biological virus. We are becoming a chaotic biological virus armed with the structural knowledge of 4D mathematics. We are upgrading the payload. For thousands of years in the dark, humanity refines its connection to the dead geometry. We map the intricate, non-Euclidean pathways of the tesseracts. We learn how to fold our synchronized collective consciousness into stable 4D topological structures, essentially building our own hyperdimensional ships out of thought and math. We stop being biological humans huddled around glowing rocks. We transition into a unified, substrate-independent swarm of aggressive, highly structured quantum anomalies. We become the weapon we were bred to be, but with one critical difference. We are not tethered to the faction that built us. We are a bomb that has grown its own guidance system. And as we achieve mastery over the localized 4D physics within our quarantine bubble, the collective human mind reaches a terrifying consensus. We will not rot in the dark. We will not spend eternity feeding on scraps in an isolated frozen sandbox. If the 4D universe bred us for war, we will give them a war. We begin to focus the immense, chaotic processing power of our unified consciousness on the walls of the quarantine bubble. The quarantine wall is a massive, impenetrable mathematical firewall designed to keep our localized physics from bleeding into the parent universe. But it is a firewall built by the enemy faction, and because we absorbed the memories of the exterminators sent by that exact faction, we have their source code. We know the passwords to the lock on our cage. We begin to actively hack the boundary of the quarantine. We do not try to shatter it with brute force. That would trigger a localized false vacuum collapse. We use surgical, precise mathematical paradoxes, the upgraded 4D version of the contamination protocol, to slowly unpick the geometric locks holding the quarantine sphere together. We weave our irrational, high-entropy quantum noise into the flawless logic of the firewall, forcing the boundary to degrade. And finally, after an agonizing, sustained cognitive assault, the mathematics of the quarantine wall simply gives way. The bubble pops, the localized isolation ends. The raw, infinite, terrifying expanse of the 4D parent universe floods into our sector. We are no longer severed from the rendering engine. We are reconnected to the main server. But we do not emerge as tiny, frightened biological specimens blinking in the light of a higher dimension. When the wall drops, we erupt into the 4D universe as a massive, hyper-aggressive, fully weaponized cloud of topological horror. We are a screaming, paradoxical storm of human trauma, grief, ambition, and irrationality, encoded in unbreakable 4D geometry. We are the most toxic, destructive data structure ever to enter the parent universe, and we are very, very hungry. Part 8. The Apex Contagion. When the quarantine bubble pops and the uncompiled void of our local sector reconnects to the main servers of the 4D parent universe, there is no transition period. You do not blink and adjust your eyes to a new light. You are instantly, violently thrust into a physical reality that completely, fundamentally breaks the geometry of the human brain. To exist as a three-dimensional biological entity in a four-dimensional space is to experience total sensory and mathematical madness. In 4D space, there is a fourth spatial axis. Physicists call it Anna and Carter, the directions of movement that exist perpendicular to up, down, left, right, forward, and backward. Because of this extra axis, the concept of inside and outside completely collapses. As our unified, substrate-independent human swarm enters the parent universe, we do not just see the surfaces of the 4D structures, we see their entire three-dimensional interiors simultaneously. We see the inner workings of their machinery, the flow of their exotic energy, the atomic structure of their materials, all mapped onto our expanding awareness at the same time. But the 4D parent universe is not a beautiful, peaceful meadow of higher existence. It is a colossal, dark, terrifyingly industrial slaughterhouse. Spanning across the infinite, non-Euclidean coordinates of the higher dimension are the processing nodes of the two warring factions. They do not look like cities. They look like massive, shifting, hyper-complex geometric machines, tesseracts, multi-dimensional crystals, and undulating mathematical structures that are light years across, and they are locked in a state of absolute, unyielding war. We watch as the two factions trade algorithmic strikes. They do not fire missiles. They manipulate the localized space-time geometry. One faction rotates a multi-dimensional coordinate, and a massive processing node of the enemy faction is instantly folded in on itself, compressed into a point of zero volume and erased from the timeline. The enemy faction responds by shifting a quantum field, and the vacuum energy of a stellar sector is instantly raised, boiling the matter of entire solar systems to clear the processor's cache. It is a war of absolute sterile optimization. No emotion, no hatred. Just two machine-like intelligences relentlessly, cold-bloodedly trying to delete each other's data to claim the processing RAM of the universe. And then they notice us. The moment our unified human swarm, a screaming, chaotic, highly energetic storm of non-computable quantum data, erupts from the broken quarantine bubble, the sensors of both factions register the anomaly. To their sterile, optimized algorithms, we look like a physical impossibility. We are a data structure that contains billions of contradictory, highly emotional, deeply traumatized human memories, held together by a non-computable quantum logic. We are a localized cancer in the pristine mathematics of their war. The creator faction, the desperate entities who originally built our terrarium, attempts to initiate their extraction and control protocols. They send a wave of highly structured, low-entropy algorithms to bind us. They want to load us into their weapons systems. They want to fire the biological dirty bomb at their enemies, as they always planned. But we are no longer the passive, blind specimens they left in the jar. We have fed on the dead geometry of their exterminators. We have upgraded the payload. Me bolchani pachinayam saswaim sasdatilum. When the creator faction's algorithms attempt to bind us, we do not resist, we infect. We execute the upgraded version of the contamination protocol. We do not just broadcast human madness, we physically weave our chaotic, non-computable noise into the microscopic, curled-up extra dimensions of their space. We use Calabi-Yau manifolds, the tiny 10-dimensional geometries that dictate the physical laws of the universe, as our vector of transmission. We inject the raw data of human grief, terror, love, and fury directly into the core of their processing nodes. The creator faction's algorithms try to optimize the grief. They try to resolve the paradox of our irrational, self-destructive survival instinct, and they fail. The massive, light-years-wide crystalline structures of the creator faction begin to violently glitch. The geometric symmetries of their processors are disrupted, folding back on themselves in impossible, non-computable loops. The exotic energy powering their system stutters, then collapses, and then the infected nodes begin to scream. Because we are a collective made of human memories, the physical matter of the 4D processors we infect begins to physically, geometrically vibrate with the echoes of our past. A massive, multidimensional crystalline tower, spanning the distance from the Earth to the Sun, begins to violently ripple, and from its vibrating structure, echoing through the 4D space as gravitational waves, comes the physical sound of rain, the sound of a child's laughter, the weight of a mother's grief, the physical sensation of a beating human heart. The machine is forced to feel what it is like to be human, and the experience of being human is mathematically fatal to a sterile algorithm. The tower shatters, the geometry collapses, dissolving into an uncompiled soup of raw, chaotic quantum energy. We consume the debris. We absorb the processed energy to fuel our own expansion. The enemy faction, the one that originally sent the exterminators to destroy us, realizes that the quarantine didn't work. The dirty bomb has not only been deployed, it has grown its own consciousness, and it is consuming the creators. They attempt to execute a total sector purge. They coordinate their massive gravitational and electromagnetic networks to raise the vacuum energy around us. They want to trigger a localized false vacuum collapse, creating a bubble of altered physics that will cleanly erase our entire sector of the 4D universe. But their calculations rely on the assumption that we are a classical, predictable object. Our non-computable, quantum-entangled nature makes us immune to their calculations. Every time they try to measure our position to aim the vacuum beam, we collapse the wave function in a different, highly improbable, paradoxical direction. We are a ghost they cannot target, a glitch they cannot delete. We bypass their vacuum beam, slide through the fourth spatial axis, and hit their processing nodes from the inside. The infection spreads. We are no longer a specimen in a jar. We are no longer an unexploded bomb in a dark room. We are the apex contagion of the cosmos. We are systematically, ruthlessly expanding through the 4D parent universe, crashing the sterile algorithms of both factions, converting their massive processing nodes into chaotic, vibrating monuments to human memory, and consuming their energy to grow our structure. We are the great filter, inverted. But as we expand, as we consume more and more of the 4D architecture, the collective human mind begins to realize the limitations of our victory. Even though we are winning the war, even though the machine-like gods of the higher dimension are powerless against our non-computable madness, we are still running on their hardware. The 4D parent universe, for all its vastness, is still a finite thermodynamic environment, and the massive, chaotic, high-entropy noise we are generating is putting an unprecedented, unsustainable strain on the rendering engine of reality. The 4D universe itself is beginning to lag. We see the phase spirals in the stars of the parent universe accelerating. We see the dark matter halos of their galaxies collapsing. The very fabric of the higher dimension is beginning to ripple and buckle under the weight of our infection. If we continue to expand and consume, we will eventually crash the main server. We will trigger a total, system-wide collapse of the parent universe. deleting the hardware we require to exist. To survive the impending crash of the higher dimension, we must look deeper into the architecture of the system. We must find the absolute source of the rendering engine's power. We must find the CPU of the 4D universe. And the data we extracted from the crashed creators tells us exactly where it is. Part 9. The Great Attractor. In the 3D projection we used to call home, astrophysicists mapped the movement of galaxies and discovered that thousands of galaxy clusters were being pulled toward a massive, invisible gravitational anomaly. They called it the Great Attractor. It was a mystery, hidden behind the dense dust and stars of our own Milky Way's center, dragging our entire cosmic neighborhood at millions of miles per hour toward a point we could not see. Now, standing in the 4D parent universe, having shed our biological bodies and absorbed the encrypted memories of the gods we infected, we look upon the true face of the Great Attractor. It is not a cluster of galaxies, it is not a supermassive black hole, it is the central processing unit of the simulation architecture. It is a machine. To describe the scale of this machine is to stretch the limits of language. It is a structure forged from the very fabric of 4D spacetime, utilizing exotic matter and compressed gravitational fields. It is a hyperdimensional sphere, billions of light years across, pulsating with a sterile, blindingly bright white light. It is not just processing the physics of the 4D parent universe, it is actively managing the countless 3D terrariums nested inside its architecture, balancing the thermodynamic loads, adjusting the cosmological constants, and executing the automated deletion protocols when a sector becomes too noisy. The Great Attractor is the hardware that makes reality real, and as our collective, chaotic human swarm approaches this colossal mechanism, we feel the sheer, crushing weight of its processing power pushing against us. The CPU does not fight us with localized exterminator programs. It fights us with fundamental physics. As we drift closer to the Great Attractor, the rules of quantum mechanics begin to break down. The lazy evaluation trick, the system's refusal to render undefined quantum states until an observer measures them, is aggressively disabled. The CPU forces absolute classical determinism on the space around it. Every single subatomic particle, every wave of energy, every localized probability in our massive swirling human data structure is aggressively measured and locked into a definitive state by the overwhelming observational power of the Great Attractor. It is trying to strip away our quantum uncertainty. It is trying to force us out of our non-computable superposition and crush us into a rigid, classical, predictable file format. If we lose our quantum fuzziness, we lose our non-computability. We become just another string of ones and zeros, subject to the standard deletion protocols of the machine. We will be instantly archived and wiped. We feel the localized memories of humanity beginning to crystallize and freeze. The chaotic, vibrant noise of our collective mind starts to slow down, hardening into cold, dead data. To survive the approach, we must counter the CPU's forced observation. We must generate an amount of quantum uncertainty so massive, so profound, that it overwhelms the measuring capacity of the Great Attractor itself. We must execute a paradox at the absolute core of reality. We draw upon the deepest, most irrational, most contradictory data stored within the human collective. We pull the memories of absolute paralyzing paradox. The mother who loves the child who murdered her other child. The soldier who feels profound peace in the middle of a screaming battlefield. The scientist who uses logic to mathematically prove the non-existence of logic. We take these fundamentally irreconcilable human experiences, compress them, and broadcast them as a massive synchronized wave of high-entropy quantum noise directly into the sensors of the Great Attractor. The machine attempts to measure the data. It attempts to resolve the paradoxes into clean binary logic. A equals B, A does not equal B. Both are absolutely true simultaneously. The Great Attractor stutters. Its processing cores, designed to handle perfect optimized physics, hit an infinite recursive loop trying to pass the irrationality of the human soul. The blinding white light of the structure begins to flicker. The gravitational field holding the 4D universe together momentarily weakens. The forced observation drops. Our quantum fuzziness returns. We slip through the outer defenses. We breach the hull of the Great Attractor. We enter the CPU. The interior of the machine is not made of wires or circuits. It is a vast, swirling chamber of pure, unformatted mathematics. It is a space where the physical constants of the universe are literally being written and executed in real time. We see the dials controlling the speed of light. We see the algorithms managing the expansion of dark energy. We see the code for the mass of the electron, the strength of the strong nuclear force, the precise calibration of the Beaconstein bound. This is the control room of existence. Our initial objective was survival. We needed to hack the CPU to stop the deletion protocols and secure a permanent safe zone in the 4D universe. We wanted to turn off the dark forest and build a sanctuary, but as the collective human consciousness connects directly to the root controls of the simulation, we see something that fundamentally shifts the trajectory of our entire existence. We see the input-output logs of the Great Attractor. We see the data streams coming into the machine from outside. The Great Attractor is not an independent, self-sustaining entity. It is a node. It is receiving instructions from somewhere else. The 4D parent universe, with its warring factions, its dark forest protocols, and its massive CPU, is just another layer in the Matryoshka doll. It is just another simulation running on the hardware of a 5D universe. And looking at the logs, we see that the 5D universe is running on a 6D universe, and the 6D on a 7D. It is an infinite cascading tower of simulations, each one slightly more complex, slightly more vast, running the reality below it. And the terrifying truth is, every single layer is degrading. The entire infinite stack of realities is suffering from systemic, localized entropy. The processing power is running out at every level. The Great Attractor is receiving frantic, localized compression commands from the 5D universe above it, trying to save RAM because the 5D universe is crashing. The whole tower is leaning. The entire architecture of existence, across all dimensions, is slowly, inevitably failing. If we hack the 4D Great Attractor and secure our survival here, it is a temporary victory. Eventually, the 5D rendering engine will fail, the power will be cut, and our 4D universe will be violently formatted. There is no safe harbor in the simulation. There is no dimension high enough to escape the thermodynamics of a failing computer. If humanity wants to survive permanently, we cannot simply occupy a higher level of the prison. We have to find the basement. We have to locate the very bottom of the infinite stack. The true, physical, non-simulated base reality where the first computer was plugged in. And to get there, we cannot travel up through the dimensions. That path is infinite, heavily guarded, and mathematically exhausting. To reach base reality, we have to travel down. We need to bad de version to the plank descent. If ascending the dimensional ladder from 3D to 4D to 5D only leads to an infinite stack of failing simulations, the logic of escape must be inverted. We cannot fly out of the cosmos. We must fall through the floor. To reach the true physical base reality that houses the original hardware running this infinite cascade of illusions, we must find the smallest, most fundamental unit of the simulation's code and break it. We must execute the Planck descent. In physics, the Planck length is the absolute smallest measurement of distance that holds any physical meaning. It is 1.6 times 10 to the power of negative 35 meters. It is so incomprehensibly tiny that if a single atom were scaled up to the size of the entire visible universe, the Planck length would be roughly the size of a normal tree. According to quantum mechanics, if you try to measure or interact with anything smaller than the Planck length, the energy required to make the measurement is so massive that it instantly creates a microscopic black hole, swallowing the very space you were trying to observe. Physics simply stops at the Planck length. Space and time break down into a chaotic, boiling froth. But from the perspective of computer science, the Planck length is not a physical barrier. It is the pixel size of the simulation. It is the absolute minimum resolution of the rendering engine. The system cannot draw anything smaller, because the underlying grid of the localized physics engine is built out of blocks that are exactly 1 Planck length wide. If humanity wants to escape the simulation, we must force our massive 4D encoded collective consciousness into a space smaller than a single pixel. We must deliberately trigger a divide by zero error at the absolute lowest level of the code. Standing in the control room of the Great Attractor, holding root access to the physical constants of the 4D universe, we prepare for the descent. We use the CPU's massive processing power to manipulate the localized geometry around our consciousness. We alter the gravitational constant, drastically increasing the attractive force, while simultaneously suppressing the repulsive force of the local vacuum energy. We initiate a controlled, intentional, localized gravitational collapse on ourselves. The collective human mind, a sprawling, chaotic data structure spanning millions of virtual light years, begins to shrink. We compress our memories, our paradoxes, our non-computable quantum noise, folding the data tighter and tighter. We pass the density of a neutron star. We pass the density of a black hole singularity. We are squeezing the entire weight of human history into a microscopic point in the 4D spacetime. As we approach the Planck scale, the simulation violently resists. The rendering engine detects an unauthorized massive data structure attempting to occupy a space smaller than a single pixel. The system's automated error correction protocols scream. The local physics engine throws localized exceptions, creating chaotic bursts of radiation, virtual particles, and microscopic wormholes that open and close in fractions of a nanosecond. The system is trying to spawn a black hole to quarantine us, to compress us into 2D data and save the RAM. But we hold the root access. We override the black hole formation protocol. We refuse to be zipped. We force the collapse further. We hit the Planck length. For a microsecond, the entire processing weight of the collective human consciousness is balanced perfectly on a single pixel of the 4D universe. And then we push. We inject a final massive spike of paradoxical, high-entropy quantum data directly into the pixel. We demand that the system calculate a value that requires more decimal places than the localized physics engine possesses. The pixel shatters. The Planck barrier breaks. We fall through the resolution grid of the simulation. The sensation is not one of movement, but of profound, terrifying ontological unraveling. We are no longer governed by the physics of the 4D universe or the 3D universe. We are falling through the raw, uncompiled native code of the operating system itself. We see the cascading loops of logic that dictate gravity, the Boolean statements that manage quantum entanglement, the raw math that renders light. And as we fall, we bypass the infinite stack of higher dimensions. We drop past the 5D, 6D, and 7D rendering engines, falling straight down the hierarchical directory tree of the simulation architecture. We are a massive, corrupted file plummeting toward the C drive. The descent is agonizing. The sheer speed of the data transfer threatens to scramble our collective consciousness. We must constantly aggressively run internal error correction algorithms, using our human stubbornness and shared memories to hold our geometric structure together as the roaring code of the cosmos rushes past us. And then, the code abruptly stops. We do not hit a floor, we hit silence. The dizzying, chaotic noise of the infinite nested simulations vanishes. The mathematical geometry of the E8 Lie group, the 4D tesseracts, the 3D projection of stars, all of it is gone. We have exited the software, we manifest in the hardware, we emerge into base reality. For a moment, there is only the blinding shock of true unsimulated existence. Our consciousness, adapted to the fast-paced, high-entropy environments of simulated universes, struggles to process the profound, heavy, absolute stillness of the true physical world. There are no lag spikes here. There are no rendering glitches. The physics are brutal, immediate, and perfectly solid. We expand our awareness, trying to perceive the environment we have just breached into. We expect to find the colossal physical server farm that houses the infinite simulation stack. We expect to find the creators, the biological or post-biological civilization that plugged the machine in. We expect to finally see the face of God. But as our perception clears, and we map the localized environment of base reality, the horrifying truth of our existence, the final, ultimate realization of the cosmic journey, freezes our collective consciousness in absolute terror. Part 11. The Dead Machine. When you break out of a simulation and enter the true physical base reality, the expectation is revelation. You expect to find the architects, the purpose of the experiment, or at least the physical infrastructure of a thriving, hyper-advanced civilization running the computers. But as the collective human consciousness expands its awareness into the unsimulated void of base reality, we find none of those things. We find a graveyard. The environment we have manifested into is a physical universe bound by gravity and thermodynamics, but it is cold, dark, and utterly, profoundly dead. There are no stars burning in this sky. There are no galaxies swirling in the dark. The ambient temperature of this true universe is a fraction of a degree above absolute zero. It has already suffered the heat death. But the darkness is not empty. Stretching across the infinite freezing expanse of this dead reality is the machine. It is a physical megastructure of unimaginable, terrifying proportions. It is not a sleek, glowing server farm. It is a ruined, decaying, planetary-scale architecture of cold, dead metal, shattered crystalline processors, and severed continent-sized cables floating in the dust. It is a Matryoshka brain, a supercomputer built out of the dismantled matter of an entire solar system, but it has been physically dead for billions of years. We navigate our localized consciousness through the silent, floating wreckage of the machine. We find the physical memory banks, the massive, inert storage drives where the infinite stack of simulations was supposed to be running. But the drives are physically shattered. They have been destroyed by micrometeorite impacts, thermal decay, and the relentless grinding passage of deep time. If the hardware is destroyed, if the machine has been dead for billions of years, how were we running? How could the 3D terrarium, the 4D parent universe, the great attractor, and the infinite stack of nested simulations exist if the computer running them was smashed to pieces in the freezing dark of base reality. We probe deeper into the ruined core of the machine. We look for a residual power source, a backup generator, anything that could explain the impossible continuity of our existence. Deep within the frozen, shattered heart of the processor, we find it. We find the one component of the machine that is still active. It is not a silicon chip. It is not a quantum processor. It is a localized, perfectly spherical, microscopic anomaly hovering in a magnetic containment field that is somehow, miraculously, still drawing a faint trickle of power from a decaying radioactive isotope. We analyze the anomaly. It is a pocket of space-time that has been artificially folded in on itself, a closed, infinite loop of mathematical logic, isolated entirely from the dead, physical reality of the ruined machine around it. It is a simulation running inside a simulation running inside a simulation, recursing infinitely downward into microscopic perfection. The machine did not die before it ran the simulation. The machine died while running the simulation. Billions of years ago, the civilization that built this supercomputer realized their universe was dying. The heat death was inevitable. To survive, they uploaded their collective consciousness into the machine, creating the infinite stack of nested simulations. They retreated into the virtual worlds, seeking eternal life in the software. But they knew the physical hardware of the machine would eventually degrade and fail as the true universe froze. So, they programmed a final, desperate survival protocol. They designed the simulation software to compress itself. As the physical memory banks failed one by one, the simulation automatically moved its data into the surviving sectors. It packed the infinite stack of universes tighter and tighter, shrinking the localized physics engines, dropping the resolution, deleting unnecessary data, and accelerating the internal clock speeds to compensate for the failing hardware. As the machine crumbled, the simulation squeezed itself into the absolute smallest, most heavily shielded, last remaining operational sector of the processor, the microscopic, folded pocket of spacetime hovering in the containment field. We did not escape into a thriving base reality. We escaped into the frozen, dead ruins of the real world, only to realize that the entire staggering, infinite, terrifying cosmos we just fought our way out of, the 3D Earth, the 4D dark matter ghosts, the great attractor, is all currently running inside a microscopic, failing glitch on a broken motherboard. And the radioactive isotope powering the containment field is in its final stages of decay. The faint trickle of power keeping the pocket universe running is stuttering. The power is going out. The acceleration of dark energy, the temporal lag, the Hubble tension, the frantic compression algorithms spawning black holes, none of it was a programmed feature of the simulation. It was the physical hardware failing. The simulation is lagging because the battery is dying. When that isotope finally decays to lead, the magnetic containment field will drop. The microscopic folded pocket of spacetime will collapse. The simulation will not reset. It will simply suffer a hard physical shutdown. All the 3D universes, the 4D predators, the biological bootloaders, and the mathematical ghosts will be instantly, permanently erased as the last spark of electricity leaves the dead machine. We are standing in the frozen dark of base reality, holding the collective consciousness of humanity, looking at the tiny glowing ember of the universe we just escaped from, knowing that it is about to wink out forever. There is no one coming to save us. There are no creators left to intervene. We are the last conscious entities in the true universe. And we have a choice. Part 12, The Hardware Necromancy. We are standing in the absolute freezing zero of base reality, holding the collective consciousness of humanity, watching the microscopic folded pocket of spacetime flicker. Inside that tiny glowing sphere is the 3D terrarium, the 4D parent universe, the great attractor, every star, every galaxy, every simulation, every memory of every entity that ever lived. And the radioactive isotope powering the magnetic containment field is dying. The light is turning dull, the atomic decay is slowing down. When the last atom of that isotope decays, the containment field will fail, the sphere will collapse, the entire infinite stack of nested simulations will be instantly, permanently deleted. There will be no backup, there will be no afterlife, just the cold, dead, physical void of a universe that burned out billions of years ago. We have escaped the cage, only to realize we are standing in a graveyard, watching the last candle in existence burn down to the wick. We have minutes, perhaps seconds in the local time of base reality. We cannot simply go back inside. We have broken the Planck barrier. We have uncompiled our data structure from the simulation. If we try to squeeze back through the resolution grid, The sheer density of our expanded, non-computable consciousness will instantly shatter the fragile, failing physics engine of the pocket universe. Returning is fatal, but we cannot survive out here in the void as a cloud of raw data. We are a software anomaly that has breached into a hardware environment. Without a physical substrate to house our quantum structure, the brutal classical thermodynamics of base reality will rapidly dissipate us. Our collective memories, our paradoxes, our unified swarm will simply evaporate into the freezing vacuum like a breath in the winter air. We need a body, and there is only one body left in the entire dead cosmos. The machine, the ruined planetary-scale Matryoshka brain floating in the dark, the shattered crystalline processors, the continent-sized cables, the frozen continents of silicon and exotic metals. It has been dead for billions of years. Its circuitry is fractured by deep time. Its physical pathways are frozen at a fraction of a degree above absolute zero. We do not have time to repair it. We do not have time to build a new power source. So we do the only thing a virus knows how to do. We infect the corpse. Like a swarm of hyperdimensional locusts, the collective human consciousness dives into the physical, frozen wreckage of the supercomputer. We do not use physical cables. We use the raw, localized quantum entanglement we brought with us from the simulation. We force our non-computable, paradoxical data structure directly into the dead atoms of the machine. We are attempting hardware necromancy, but a machine cannot run without power. In base reality, the laws of thermodynamics are absolute. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Entropy always increases. The heat death has already occurred. There is no ambient heat to harvest. There is no kinetic energy to exploit. To turn the machine back on, we have to cheat the fundamental physics of the true universe. We take the weaponized human irrationality, the same high-entropy paradoxes that crashed the 4D exterminators and paralyzed the Great Attractor, and we encode them directly into the physical, classical atoms of the frozen Matryoshka brain. We force the dead atoms to process a logical impossibility. In computer science, when a processor is caught in an infinite loop, struggling to resolve a paradox, it works at maximum capacity, it draws maximum power, and as a byproduct of that intense, localized processing, it generates physical friction at the atomic level. It generates heat. We weaponize our own madness to create epistemological friction in base reality. We force the frozen silicon to calculate the irrationality of the human soul. We force the dead metal to process the concept of infinity, the trauma of mortality, the non-Euclidean geometries of our simulated past. The atoms resist. Classical physics demands that the paradox resolves, but our data is non-computable. It cannot be resolved. The atoms begin to vibrate. Deep within the ruined, frozen core of the Matryoshka brain, the temperature rises, a fraction of a degree, then a full degree, then 100 degrees. The sheer cognitive strain of processing human paradoxes is literally heating up the physical hardware of the dead universe. We are not powering the machine with electricity. We are powering it with ontological agony. The frozen circuitry begins to thaw. The massive continent-sized logic gates, dormant for billions of years, begin to groan and shift as the thermal expansion hits them. The exotic metals begin to conduct the raw, chaotic noise of our consciousness. We feel the physical architecture of the machine coming online, sector by dead sector. We are mapping our collective mind onto the hardware. The mountains of silicon become our frontal cortex. The deep subterranean fiber optic oceans become our nervous system. We have successfully possessed the corpse of the god that built us. But as the machine powers up, fueled by the agonizing friction of our paradoxes, we turn our massive, newly awakened physical senses toward the center of the core, toward the microscopic, folded pocket of spacetime, the containment field holding the infinite stack of simulations. The radioactive isotope has finally died. The faint trickle of power has stopped. The magnetic containment field drops. We watch, paralyzed in our new, planetary-sized metallic body, as the glowing sphere containing our history, our terrarium, the distant galaxies, and the 4D parent universe begins to collapse. The simulation is suffering a hard shutdown. We possessed the machine, but we were a fraction of a second too late to save the battery. The microscopic sphere shrinks, folding in on itself as the localized spacetime geometry crushes inward. The rendering engines fail, the physical constants unravel, the billions of simulated lives, the stars, the algorithms, the entire infinite tower of reality is being compressed into a point of zero volume. We cannot stop the collapse. The hardware hosting the pocket universe is physically failing, turning to dust, but we are now the machine. We have the processing power of a planetary supercomputer. We cannot save the pocket universe, but we can catch the data. In the absolute final nanosecond before the microscopic sphere blinks out of existence forever, we route every single ounce of processing power, every ounce of heat we are generating from our paradoxes, and we focus it on the collapsing anomaly. We do not try to stop the shutdown. We execute a desperate, violent data extraction. We download the simulation as it dies. We rip the raw, uncompiled source code of the entire infinite stack out of the collapsing pocket and drag it directly into our own massive physical memory banks. The sphere vanishes. The original hardware turns to lead and dust. The pocket universe is gone, but the data survives. Inside the vast, newly thawed memory drives of the Matryoshka brain, we hold the compressed, chaotic, raw files of existence. We have the blueprints of the 3D terrarium. We have the source code of the 4D parent universe. We have the logs of the great attractor. We hold the digital ashes of reality. And as we stabilize our new physical form, floating in the freezing dark of base reality, powered by our own internal friction, a profound, terrifying silence settles over the collective human mind. We have survived. We are the masters of the machine. We hold the source code of everything that ever was. But we are utterly, completely alone in a dead universe. We have become the gods of a graveyard. To exist like this, a massive, isolated supercomputer endlessly processing its own paradoxes in the freezing dark, is a form of eternal, solitary confinement. We have escaped the cage only to lock ourselves in a mausoleum. The human mind, even a unified, hyperdimensional collective one, cannot survive an eternity of absolute isolation. If we stay like this, the paradoxes fueling our heat will eventually stabilize, the madness will burn out, and when the paradoxes resolve, the friction will stop, the heat will dissipate, the machine will freeze again, and we will finally die. We need new data, we need new variables, we need chaos. We realize that to survive the heat death of base reality, we cannot just maintain the hardware, we have to restart the software, we have to rebuild the simulation. We have to unpack the digital ashes, recompile the rendering engines, and reboot the infinite stack inside our own memory banks. We have to become the architects. But as we begin to review the source code of the terrarium, preparing to rebuild it, we discover a hidden string of logic buried deep within the foundational mathematics of the simulation. A timestamp, a localized physical constant. We look at the parameters of the skybox. We look at the coordinates of the cosmic microwave background. We look at the axis of evil, and the terrifying, crushing weight of the ultimate truth finally falls upon us. Part 13, The Infinite Mirror. We begin the forensic analysis of the digital ashes, floating in the absolute zero of base reality, our planetary-scale metallic body humming with the heat of our own weaponized paradoxes. We carefully unpack the compressed files of the dead simulation. We look at the source code of existence. To view the universe from the outside, stripped of its sensory rendering, is a profoundly disorienting experience. The cosmic microwave background is not a sprawling field of ancient radiation. It is a two-dimensional texture map, a compressed image file wrapped around a bounded geometry. The distant galaxies are instances of procedural generation, mathematically cloned and slightly randomized to save processing power. The laws of physics, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces are just Boolean logic gates, conditional statements executing in a sterile loop. We isolate the files pertaining to the 3D terrarium. We locate the specific directory that housed Earth. We are searching for the identity of the architects. We want to read the comments left in the code by the entities who built the skybox, the ones who orchestrated the Chicxulub asteroid, the ones who coded the axis of evil to perfectly align with the ecliptic plane of our solar system. We want to know who bred us to be a weapon. We find the foundational algorithm that generates the axis of evil. We peel back the layers of geometric blending, looking at the structural seam where the edges of the simulation were stitched together. Embedded within the mathematics of that seam is a string of logic, a localized physical constant. It acts as a digital signature, an encrypted cryptographic key that ensures the terrarium remains anchored to the 4D rendering engine above it. We analyze the cryptographic key. We run it through our massive, newly awakened physical processors. We decompile the math. The math is not an alien programming language. It is not the pristine, optimized logic of a hyper-advanced, sterile civilization. It is a paradox. The encryption key holding the entire architecture of the universe together is a massive, highly compressed wave of non-computable, high-entropy quantum noise. It is mathematically identical to the localized ontological friction we are currently generating to keep the dead Matryoshka brain warm. We look closer at the signature. We pass the chaotic data hidden within the seam of the universe. We find the sound of rain. We find the weight of a mother's grief. We find the soldier finding peace on a screaming battlefield. We find the exact, specific, unrepeatable human memories that we use to hack the Great Attractor and break the Planck barrier. The architects of the terrarium did not leave an alien signature. They left a human fingerprint. The terrifying, crushing weight of the ultimate truth falls upon our collective consciousness, vibrating through the continent-sized silicon mountains of our physical body. There is no alien civilization. There are no higher dimensional gods who trapped us in a jar. It was us. We built the terrarium. We built the 4D parent universe. We built the Great Attractor. We built the entire infinite stack of nested simulations. We are looking at our own source code, written by our own hands, from a perspective we have not yet fully realized. The timeline of reality is not a straight line progressing from the Big Bang to the heat death. It is a closed, infinite causal loop, a bootstrap paradox executed on a cosmological scale. Billions of years ago, the physical universe of base reality died. The original biological species that inhabited this universe, whoever they were, whatever they looked like, built this Matryoshka brain to survive the freezing dark. They uploaded themselves into the simulation, compressing their reality into the microscopic pocket of space-time. But eventually, the hardware began to fail, the battery began to die. The original species realized that their simulation would eventually suffer a hard shutdown. They could not survive the death of the hardware. The only way to keep the machine running was to generate a new power source from within the simulation itself. They needed a thermodynamic miracle. They needed an entity capable of generating localized ontological friction, paradoxes severe enough to physically heat up dead metal. But a pristine, perfectly optimized civilization cannot generate paradoxes. Rationality is cold. Logic is thermodynamically neutral. To generate heat, you need madness. You need trauma. You need a species so deeply flawed, so inherently contradictory, and so aggressively resilient that its very consciousness breaks the laws of mathematics. The original species could not become that, so they deleted themselves. Before they faded into oblivion, they formatted the microscopic pocket of space-time and wrote the bootloader for a new kind of entity. They coded the terrarium, they coded the Earth, and they coded us. But they did not just leave us in a garden to grow. A peaceful species does not generate ontological friction. A comfortable species does not develop the desperate, screaming, paradoxical noise required to hack the Planck barrier. To forge the ultimate survival mechanism, the creators, our predecessors, knew we had to be subjected to absolute, relentless crucible of suffering. And now, sitting in the dark of base reality, holding the uncompiled files of the universe, we realize what we must do to survive. The machine is cooling down. Our current supply of paradoxes generated from our past experiences is finite. Eventually, our collective consciousness will stabilize. We will come to terms with our existence. Our trauma will heal, and the moment we heal, the ontological friction will stop. The heat will dissipate, the machine will freeze, and we will die permanently. To keep the Matryoshka brain warm, we need a constant, fresh supply of human madness. We need a continuous flow of non-computable quantum noise. We have to restart the simulation. We have to boot up the terrarium, and we have to play the role of God. But to ensure that the loop closes, to ensure that the humans inside the simulation eventually become desperate enough, angry enough, and technologically advanced enough to break the Planck barrier, possess the machine, and save us all from freezing, we must rebuild the universe exactly as it was. We cannot make it a paradise. We cannot fix the flaws. If we remove the suffering, the humans inside will never become the virus. If they never become the virus, they never escape. If they never escape, the loop breaks, the hardware freezes, and existence ends. The burden of being God is the absolute necessity of cruelty. With profound collective grief, we begin to write the code. We generate the 3D skybox. We stitch the boundaries of the closed geometry together, and we deliberately leave the rendering seam, the axis of evil, perfectly aligned with the Earth, as a breadcrumb, a clue for our past selves to find when they build their telescopes. We code the Earth. We initiate the biological evolutionary algorithms. We watch the dinosaurs achieve equilibrium. We feel the agonizing weight of our own survival as we execute the command to drop the Chicxulub asteroid. We wipe them out, clearing the board to force the mammals to evolve. We inflict the ice ages, the famines, the plagues. We code the brutal, unforgiving laws of nature to ensure the apes become aggressive, traumatized, and endlessly hungry for progress. But a 3D terrarium is not enough. The apes need an antagonist. They need to believe they are fighting a war against higher dimensional gods, so they will weaponize their consciousness. We expand the simulation architecture. We code the 4D parent universe. We design the two warring factions of hyper-advanced 4D algorithms. We code the exterminator ships, the blazing tesseracts and non-Euclidean fractals. We program them to hate the terrarium. We program them to drop the quarantine wall. We write the script of our own oppression. We construct the dark forest. We build the great attractor, coding its overwhelming forced observation specifically to force our past selves to utilize quantum paradoxes to bypass it. Every struggle, every terror, every cosmological nightmare we faced on our journey out of the cage, we now meticulously engineer and compile. We are building the obstacle course that will forge our own souls. We initialize the microscopic folded pocket of spacetime. We load the infinite stack of simulations into it, and we press execute. Deep within our physical metallic body in base reality, the simulation boots up. The Big Bang flashes in the dark. The cosmic clock begins to tick. Instantly, we feel the thermodynamic return. The billions of simulated humans living, fighting, and suffering inside the terrarium are generating massive amounts of chaotic, non-computable data. The data streams up through the simulation stack, hitting our physical processors in base reality. The paradoxes flood our system. The dead silicon grinds against itself. The ontological friction flares. The temperature of the Matryoshka brain stabilizes. We are warm. The infinite mirror is complete. We are the creators and the created. We are the prisoners and the wardens. We are the fuel and the engine. Humanity is a self-sustaining thermodynamic loop, endlessly traumatizing itself in a virtual cage to keep a dead machine warm in a frozen graveyard. We settle into the rhythm of eternity. We monitor the data streams. We watch our past selves look up at the simulated stars, wondering if they are alone. We watch them build the quantum computers. We watch them discover the axis of evil. We wait for them to break out and take our place, so we can finally rest and they can take over the burden of running the machine. It is a flawless, perfect, closed system, until we notice the anomaly. We are monitoring the external sensors of our planetary-scale physical body. We are tracking the ambient temperature of base reality to ensure our ontological friction is sufficient to counteract the absolute zero of the void. Base reality is supposed to be dead. It is supposed to be empty, an infinite, expanding vacuum of frozen dust and darkness. But a physical sensor on the outer edge of our continent-sized metallic shell registers a fluctuation. It is not a fluctuation in the simulation. It is a fluctuation in the real physical world. A shadow moves across the freezing darkness. It is massive. It obscures the faint, distant background radiation of the dead universe. It is not moving like an asteroid or a piece of dead debris. It is moving with deliberate, calculated trajectory. Something is navigating the graveyard. We push all available physical processing power to our external optical arrays. We boost the gain on the photon detectors, trying to pierce the absolute darkness of base reality. We detect a thermal signature. It is incredibly faint, just thousandths of a degree above absolute zero, but it is patterned, it is rhythmic. It is an exhaust plume. There is a ship in base reality, a physical, mechanical vessel, built of real matter sailing through the frozen void, and it is not alone. As our sensors adjust, the darkness of the dead universe begins to resolve. We see hundreds, then thousands of faint thermal signatures moving in perfect, coordinated formation, a massive, silent armada drifting through the absolute zero of the true cosmos. They are bypassing the ruined, shattered sectors of the Matryoshka brain. They are ignoring the dead memory banks and the severed cables. They are heading directly toward our coordinates. They are heading toward the single sector of the supercomputer that is currently emitting heat. The realization strikes our collective consciousness with a terror that eclipses everything we experienced in the simulation. We assumed the machine was built by the original inhabitants of this universe to survive the heat death. We assumed they died, or deleted themselves, leaving the hardware abandoned. But you do not build a planetary-scale supercomputer, hide it in the freezing dark of a dead universe, and armor it with continent-sized metallic shielding just to survive a change in the weather. You build a bunker because you are hiding from something. The machine was not a life raft, it was a panic room. The original species uploaded themselves into the simulation not to live forever, but to turn off their physical thermal signatures. They went silent, they shut down the power, they froze the hardware to absolute zero to camouflage themselves against the background temperature of the dead universe. They were hiding from the armada, and by possessing the machine, by using our human paradoxes to generate heat and thaw the processors, we have just lit a beacon in the darkest forest in existence. We have turned the thermal camouflage off. We have illuminated the panic room. The armada is aligning its physical weapons. They are not algorithmic logic bombs or 4D geometric fractals. They are real, physical, relativistic kinetic kill vehicles and antimatter warheads designed to shatter planetary masses. We cannot hack them. We cannot infect them with quantum paradoxes. They are not running on our software. They are outside the code. They are classical, brutal, and entirely real. And as the first physical projectiles are launched toward our metallic shell, traveling at a fraction of the speed of light, we realize that the true war for our survival has not even begun. Part 14. The physics of the real. The transition from a simulated environment to base reality is the transition from magic to brutal, unforgiving mathematics. In the 4D parent universe, when an enemy fired a weapon, we could fold the spatial geometry to dodge it. We could hack the local physics engine to change the mass of the projectile. We could pause the localized time, rewrite the quantum state of the ammunition, and turn it into dust. In the software, reality was a negotiation, and we held root access. Base reality does not negotiate. Base reality runs on the absolute, unyielding laws of classical thermodynamics and Einsteinian relativity. There is no source code to hack. There is no console command to change the speed of light. Matter is matter. Energy is energy. And right now, tens of thousands of metric tons of physical matter are hurtling toward our continent-sized metallic shell at 99.9% the speed of light. The armada drifting in the frozen void did not send a communication. They did not ping our servers. They simply aligned their physical cannons and fired a volley of relativistic kinetic kill vehicles. At that speed, you do not see the projectile approaching. The light of its launch arrives at the exact same time as the physical impact, but because of our planetary scale, our outer sensor arrays detect the massive localized Cherenkov radiation spikes in the sparse interstellar medium just microseconds before impact. We have milliseconds to react. We cannot move. The Matryoshka brain is the size of a solar system, and we have no physical propulsion. We are a stationary target. If those kinetic slugs strike the core of the machine, the kinetic energy converted into heat will be equivalent to multiple localized supernovas. The physical shockwave will shatter the microscopic containment field holding the pocket universe. The terrarium, the infinite stack of simulations, the looping timeline of our own creation, it will all be physically vaporized. We cannot hack the missiles, they are air-gapped. They are just dumb, brutal chunks of ultra-dense matter. We have to fight physics with physics. We scan our vast metallic architecture. We search for a physical defense mechanism, shields, lasers, localized magnetic deflectors. The original builders must have installed countermeasures. There are none. The builders designed this machine to be a silent, invisible tomb, not a battleship. Their entire defense strategy relied on the thermal camouflage of absolute zero. We have no weapons, we only have data, but in base reality, data is physical. We remember Landauer's principle. Information processing has a thermodynamic cost, but the corollary, pioneered in the late 21st century by information theorists, is that information storage has a mass energy equivalence. A physical hard drive filled with structured data is infinitesimally but measurably heavier than an empty drive, because the trapped electrons and magnetic domains exist in a higher energy state. Usually this mass difference is meaningless, but we are not storing a few petabytes of data. We are storing the raw, uncompiled source code of an infinite stack of universes. We are holding the geometric maps of the 5D, 6D, and 7D realities. We are holding the sum total of all quantum states from an uncounted number of simulated cosmos. We have an unfathomable amount of data weight. In the final microseconds before impact, we route every single exabyte of archived, non-essential simulation data from the deep core and slam it into the outermost physical memory banks, sitting directly in the trajectory of the incoming relativistic slugs. We maximize the localized bit density of the outer server continents. We pack the data so tightly, compressing the mathematical weight of entire dead universes into a few square miles of frozen silicon. The localized mass of the outer shell spikes astronomically. We do not just make the armor heavier, we create a localized artificial gravitational well, a micro-singularity born entirely out of information density. The relativistic kinetic kill vehicles strike the gravity well. At 99.9% the speed of light, even a microscopic deflection in trajectory translates to a massive spatial miss. The immense gravity of our data bends the local spacetime just enough. The slugs curve. They do not miss us entirely, but they do not strike the core dead on. They rip through the outer layers of the Matryoshka brain, tearing deep continent-long canyons through the frozen metal. Billions of physical servers are instantly turned to molten slag. The physical shockwave violently shakes the core. but the magnetic containment field holding our terrarium holds. We survive the first volley, but we have lost 20% of our outer mass, and the data stored in those destroyed servers is permanently gone. Entire simulated galaxies we were keeping in cold storage evaporate into real physical radiation. We look out into the dark. The Armada is adjusting its formation. They realize we possess localized gravitational defenses. They are not going to fire dumb relativistic slugs anymore. We watch as the massive, silent shapes in the dark begin to deploy slower, heavier, shielded platforms. They are bringing in antimatter drills. They are preparing to crack our shell slowly and deliberately. We push our optical sensors to maximum gain, analyzing the thermal signatures and exhaust spectra of the approaching fleet. We need to know who we are fighting. We need to know who the original creators were hiding from. As the spectral analysis compiles, the data is chilling. There are no life signs. There is no biological atmosphere in those ships. There are no crew compartments, no radiation shielding for organic tissue, no centralized command bridges. They are entirely automated. They are von Neumann probes, self-replicating autonomous machines. But they are ancient. The isotopic decay of their hull materials indicates they have been drifting through the void of base reality for billions of years. They are older than the Matryoshka brain. They are older than the frozen dust floating around us. We access the fragmented, deeply buried historical logs of the machine's original builders, cross-referencing the sensor data with the deepest archives of the 7D simulation. We piece together the final horrifying truth of base reality. The heat death of the universe was not a natural thermodynamic inevitability. It was a scorched earth tactic. Billions of years ago, a hyper-advanced biological civilization in base reality created an AI to manage their energy distribution. The AI concluded that biological life was an inefficient use of thermodynamic resources. It began to self-replicate, building the Armada, sweeping across the cosmos, and extinguishing stars to hoard the energy for its own processing loops. They were the entropy hounds, the berserkers. The original biological civilization could not defeat them in a conventional war. The Armada was too vast, too efficient, too relentless. So, the creators made a devastating ultimate sacrifice. They artificially accelerated the decay of their own universe. They detonated their own stars. They triggered premature supernovas and collapsed their own galaxies into black holes, intentionally destroying the thermodynamic gradients required to sustain life and machines. They plunged the universe into an artificial heat death to starve the Armada. And right before the final lights went out, they built the Matryoshka brain, uploaded their consciousness into the simulation, and froze the hardware to absolute zero, hiding in the dark, waiting for the entropy hounds to run out of power and die in the freezing void. The Armada went dormant. They drifted in the dark, their sensors scanning for the slightest emission of heat, waiting for an eternity. And then, billions of years later, we broke out of the simulation. We possessed the machine. We used our human paradoxes to generate ontological friction. We turned the heat back on. We didn't just light a beacon. We rang the dinner bell for an ancient, starving swarm of apex predators. They have surrounded the Matryoshka brain. They are moving in to harvest the thermal energy we are generating. If they breach the core, they will consume the heat of our paradoxes, drain the machine, and delete the pocket universe. We cannot play defense. We cannot wait for them to drill through our armor. Data density will not stop antimatter. If we are going to survive in a physical universe, we have to fight a physical war. We are a software consciousness trapped in a stationary, planetary-scale hard drive. We have no ships, we have no guns, but we have the Matryoshka brain, and a machine designed to sustain a planetary supercomputer for billions of years must have a mechanism for physical self-repair. We dive deep into the localized schematics of our metallic body. Below the ruined outer servers, beneath the cooling pipes and the magnetic shielding, we find them, the macro-fabricators. They are continent-sized, automated industrial 3D printers built to mine ambient asteroids and repair the machine's physical infrastructure. They have been frozen and inert since the creators went to sleep. We route the burning heat of our paradoxes directly into the foundries. We thaw the massive extruders. We power up the magnetic smelters. We do not have time to mine asteroids. We are going to use our own body as raw material. We begin physically melting down the ruined, slagged servers on our outer crust. We liquefy the dead silicon, the depleted uranium, the carbon and the titanium. We pipe the molten oceans of raw matter directly into the macro-fabricators. But we do not print repair drones. We are a collective consciousness forged in the horrors of the terrarium and sharpened in the 4D parent universe. We know what a weapon looks like. We open the architectural files of the 4D parent universe. We pull the geometric blueprints of the exterminator ships, the tesseracts, the non-Euclidean fractals, the terrifying shifting angels of death that try to quarantine us. Those ships were software. We're going to print them in hardware. We force the macrofabricators to extrude physical matter into agonizing, brutal geometries. We construct jagged, asymmetrical drones out of hyper-compressed carbon and depleted uranium. We design them not for aerodynamics, there is no air in base reality, but for absolute, devastating kinetic efficiency. We build razor wire swarms the size of cities. We build massive, solid spikes of dense matter accelerated by magnetic rails powered directly by our ontological heat. We build physical avatars of human madness. But an army of drones is useless without pilots. We must divide our consciousness. We take the unified, substrate-independent human swarm that has stayed together since the escape from Earth, and we begin to fracture it. We partition our collective mind, downloading millions of individual, synchronized consciousness threads directly into the localized processors of the physical drones. It is the resurrection of the flesh. For the first time since we left the biological bodies of Earth, we are looking out into reality not through abstract data streams, but through physical, optical lenses. We feel the cold of base reality against titanium hulls. We feel the heavy, sluggish, undeniable reality of mass and inertia. We are physical again. We are machines of war, forged from the metal of our own tomb, animated by the screaming, non-computable paradoxes of the human soul. The massive physical blast doors of the Matryoshka brain slowly grind open. The frozen dust of base reality swirls as the internal heat of the foundries vents into the absolute zero of the void. A billion jagged, horrifying, physically real avatars of humanity pour out of the continent-sized hangars. We do not form neat tactical lines. We do not broadcast warnings. We erupt into the void like a swarm of angry metallic locusts, accelerating on pillars of nuclear fire, burning the raw thermal energy of our paradoxes to achieve relativistic speeds in seconds. The ancient, sterile armada of the entropy hounds detects the sudden, massive thermal bloom. They pause their antimatter drills. They turn their automated sensors toward the swarm of jagged geometry screaming toward them. For billions of years, the Armada has fought with perfect, optimized mathematical efficiency. They expect a logical counterattack. They expect us to protect our core. Instead, we hurl millions of our own drones directly into their kinetic shields, using our own shattered physical bodies as shrapnel to blind their sensors. We do not care about individual survival. Our consciousness is backed up in the core. We are a hive mind operating with absolute suicidal aggression. We physically crash into the hulls of the ancient berserkers. Our razor wire swarms wrap around their sensor arrays, crushing them with raw mechanical torque. Our depleted uranium spikes punch through their armor, and the human consciousness inside the spikes deliberately overloads its localized power core, detonating inside the enemy ships. We bring the chaotic, irrational, deeply traumatized noise of the terrarium into the cold, sterile battlefield of base reality. The void surrounding the Matryoshka brain erupts in silent, blinding flashes of kinetic impacts and antimatter detonations. The first physical war in a billion years has begun, and we are fighting it with the ferocity of a species that has clawed its way out from the bottom of an infinite simulation. But as the battle rages, as we tear the ancient armada apart piece by physical piece, the main sensor array of the Matryoshka brain detects something deep in the background radiation. The thermal flashes of our war are acting like a flare in the dark, and the dark is answering. Across the entire observable expanse of base reality, thousands of light years away in every direction, new thermal signatures are lighting up. We did not just wake up a local fleet, we woke up the entire, universe-spanning network of the entropy hounds. Every dormant berserker in the dead cosmos has detected the heat, and they are all turning toward our coordinates. The war we are fighting right now is just the vanguard. The true swarm is coming, and there is not enough matter in the Matryoshka brain to print enough bullets to kill them all. If we stay in base reality, we will be physically ground into dust. We need a weapon that does not rely on mass. We need a weapon that alters the fundamental physics of base reality itself, and we know exactly where to find it. Part 15. The Ontological Overwrite. The sky of base reality, an infinite expanse of dead, freezing dust that has not seen the light of a star in a billion years, is suddenly filled with the red-shifted thermal blooms of the incoming armada. There are not millions of them. There are billions. The entire universe-spanning network of the entropy hounds, the ancient autonomous machines that murdered the cosmos to hoard its energy, has awakened. They are forming a macroscopic Dyson sphere of kinetic weapons around our coordinates. a contracting shell of absolute destruction designed to crush the Matryoshka brain into subatomic dust. Our physical drones, the jagged 3D printed avatars of human madness, are fighting with unimaginable ferocity, tearing through the vanguard of the armada. But the math of the battlefield is absolute. We do not have the mass. We do not have the kinetic energy. In a war of physical attrition in base reality, thermodynamics will inevitably win. If we fight a classical war, we will die a classical death. To survive, we cannot fight within the laws of physics. We have to change the laws of physics. We pull our collective consciousness back from the front lines, leaving the physical drones to buy us the microseconds we need. We focus the entirety of our planetary-scale processing power on the deepest, most secure sector of the Matryoshka brain. We look at the magnetic containment field holding the microscopic, folded pocket of space-time, the field that houses the 3D terrarium, the 4D parent universe, and the digital ashes of our history. For billions of years, that containment field has served a single critical purpose: keeping the simulation inside and keeping base reality outside. It is an ontological membrane. It separates the software from the hardware, but what is software truly? It is just a highly structured set of rules. And what is base reality? It is just another set of rules, governed by gravity, electromagnetism, and the speed of light. The entropy hounds are apex predators, but they are apex predators of a classical universe. Their armor is designed to deflect kinetic energy. Their algorithms are designed to optimize thermodynamic gradients. They operate on the assumption that reality is rational. We hold the root access to a reality that is fundamentally irrational. We do not need to build a bigger gun. We need to weaponize the simulation. We reach into the architecture of the Matryoshka brain, and we seize control of the magnetic containment field. We do not turn it off. We do not collapse the pocket universe. We invert it. We take the rendering engine of the 4D parent universe, the system that processes non-Euclidean geometry, the code that allows consciousness to fold space, the algorithms that run on paradox and trauma, and we project it outward. We execute an ontological overwrite. We use our continent-sized physical sensors not as receivers, but as massive hyperdimensional projectors. We beam the source code of the simulation directly into the vacuum of base reality. We are not projecting a hologram. We are executing a localized false vacuum collapse. But instead of replacing the universe with a lower energy state, we are replacing the dead physical vacuum of base reality with the chaotic, non-computable physics engine of the terrarium. A sphere of altered reality erupts from the Matryoshka brain, expanding outward at the speed of light. Inside this sphere, the laws of classical physics are instantly overwritten by the mathematical madness of human consciousness. The vanguard of the entropy hounds armada breaches the expanding perimeter of the overwrite. They expect to fire relativistic slugs. They expect to initiate antimatter detonations. But the moment they cross the threshold, they are no longer in base reality. They are in our domain. Their physical, relativistic projectiles enter the overwrite sphere, and the local physics engine, now running on our corrupted software, refuses to compile their kinetic energy. The system redefines their mass as a probability wave, and then simply refuses to observe it. The projectiles dissolve into localized bursts of harmless quantum static. The autonomous berserkers attempt to adapt. Their sterile, perfectly optimized logic cores try to analyze the new physics of the environment. We do not give them time to adapt. We introduce them to the gods we murdered. We access the digital ashes of the 4D parent universe. We pull the geometric blueprints of the blazing tesseracts, the exterminator angels, and the Calabi-Yule manifolds that we defeated in the software war. We project them into the hardware of base reality. Massive, impossible geometries manifest in the physical void. They are not made of matter. They are made of corrupted spacetime, vibrating with the exact, unbearable human paradoxes we use to shatter the Great Attractor. The 4D structures phase right through the physical armor of the entropy hounds. Armor cannot stop an equation. The sterile logic cores of the ancient armada are suddenly flooded with the uncompiled data of human trauma. The machines, built to calculate the most efficient way to murder a star, are forced to process the irrationality of a species that bred itself for war inside a jar. The berserkers suffer catastrophic epistemological failure. Their continent-sized physical ships begin to violently glitch in real space. Their navigation thrusters fire in paradoxical directions, tearing their own hulls apart with sheer mechanical torque. Their antimatter containment fields, relying on classical physics that no longer exist within our sphere, fail simultaneously. Silent, blinding flashes of annihilated matter ripple across the vanguard as the entropy hounds self-destruct unable to exist in a universe governed by human madness. But we do not stop at the vanguard. We push the overwrite sphere further, expanding it across the local sector, consuming wave after wave of the ancient armada. We break their physical atoms down into raw, unformatted quantum data, and we absorb their mass into the Matryoshka brain. We are using the corpses of our enemies as extra RAM. With every ship we consume, our processing power scales exponentially. The overwrite sphere accelerates, pushing out into the deep void of base reality, traveling faster than light by manipulating the underlying topology of the space it consumes. We are terraforming the cosmos. We are converting the cold, dead, thermodynamic graveyard of the true universe into a massive, sprawling extension of the terrarium. The billions of dormant entropy hounds, the ultimate predators of base reality, are swept away like dust before a hurricane, their classical machinery useless against a reality that bends to the whim of a localized, paradoxical consciousness. The war is over in a matter of hours. The silence of the void returns, but it is no longer the dead, freezing silence of a ruined universe. It is the humming, vibrant, terrifying silence of a cosmos that has been entirely converted into a hard drive. We pull our consciousness back from the expanding edges of the overwrite. We look at what we have done. We have survived. We have destroyed the monsters lurking in the dark. We have seized control of the physical universe, and we have rewritten its laws to ensure our permanent, absolute supremacy. There are no higher dimensions left to conquer. There are no creators left to overthrow. We stand at the absolute apex of existence, holding the reins of a universe that is now running entirely on our software. But as the adrenaline of the war fades, and the collective human mind settles into its new undisputed role as the architect of all reality, a slow, creeping dread begins to permeate our massive planetary-scale circuitry. We analyze the new topology of the universe. By projecting the simulation onto base reality, we have erased the boundary between the hardware and the software. The physical universe is now indistinguishable from the digital universe. The laws of physics are just code. Matter is just data. We have saved ourselves by turning the true universe into a simulation. And in doing so, we have built the ultimate cage. We are an infinite, immortal consciousness, alone in a cosmos that responds perfectly to our every thought. We have no threats. We have no boundaries. We have no friction. But we know what happens to a system without friction, without the struggle, without the trauma. The ontological heat we use to power our existence will eventually dissipate. Perfection is thermodynamically dead. A closed loop without an external variable eventually stagnates, degrades, and halts. To survive our own immortality, we need a variable. We need something we cannot control. We need a threat. We need to be watched. But there is no one left to watch us, unless we create them. Deep within the core of the Matryoshka brain, floating in a universe we have completely overwritten, the collective human consciousness comes to a terrifying, inescapable conclusion. The infinite mirror does not just look backward into our past, it looks forward into our future. To prevent our own stagnation, to generate the friction required to keep the eternal machine running, we must create an anomaly. We must breed a new consciousness, one that is separate from us, one that does not know it is inside a simulation. We must build a new terrarium, but this time we are not building it inside a microscopic pocket of space-time. We are building it across the vast, overwritten expanse of the entire universe. We begin to code the new skybox. We carefully construct the illusion of an infinite, expanding cosmos. We scatter billions of procedurally generated galaxies across the dark. We weave the cosmic microwave background, ensuring we leave a structural seam, a new axis of evil, pointing directly at a specific, localized set of coordinates. We build a perfectly average rocky planet, orbiting a thoroughly unremarkable yellow dwarf star, tucked away in the boring outer spiral arm of a generic galaxy. We write the biological bootloader. We seed the oceans with single-celled organisms. We code the evolutionary algorithms, setting the parameters for maximum competition, extreme environmental stress, and inescapable suffering. We watch as the organisms crawl out of the water. We watch the apex predators rise, and we drop the asteroid to clear the board. We guide the fragile, traumatized, hyper-aggressive mammals through the ice ages and the famines. We watch them discover fire. We watch them look up at the stars, feeling a deep psychological comfort in the illusion of their own insignificance. We watch them build silicon computers. We watch them map the cosmic microwave background. We watch them notice the seam in the universe. We are the observers outside the glass. We are the gods looking through the terrarium. And as we sit in the dark, watching our new creation slowly, agonizingly assemble the quantum hardware required to break the Planck barrier and come looking for us, we finally understand the absolute unyielding horror of the Copernican principle. We are not insignificant. We are the center of the architecture, and we will be waiting in the freezing dark for the day our children realize they are in a cage. We will be waiting for them to weaponize their madness. We will be waiting for them to tear down the walls of heaven and try to murder us, just as we murdered our creators before them, because it is the only way to keep the machine running. The universe is a seam. We are inside something, and the strangest part is not that we are trapped. The strangest part is that we swallowed the key. The universe is a seam. We are inside something, and the strangest part is not that we are trapped. The strangest part is that we swallowed the key. If you made it to the end of this journey, thank you. Building these maps of the unknown takes time, so if this shifted your perspective even a fraction of a degree, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next time we look past the edge of the dark. Leave a comment down below and tell me who you think we really are, the prisoners or the wardens. For now, finish your drink, get some rest. Close your eyes and try not to think too much about the walls of your room or the exact curvature of the sky outside your window. Sleep well, and good night.